Hello everyone. We're going to now start on Chapter 1, which basically asks the simple question, what is psychology? And as you will find, there are a lot of ways to look at psychology, a lot of applications to it. So let's get started on that. Okay, as a preview for the chapter, we're going to talk about the basic definition of what psychology is. Then we'll talk a little bit about the history of psychology. We'll talk about different kinds of approaches, different subfields of psychology. We'll be talking about different kinds of careers that psychologists can end up in. And finally, we're going to look at health and wellness from the psychology point of view. And if you've taken a look at the textbook so far, you'll see that there's a theme of health and wellness throughout the textbook. And that actually fits in with our Lady of Lourdes College when you consider the healthcare focus that we have here. So let's continue. Let's get started. Let's talk about what psychology is. What is psychology? A lot of you may have, I'm sure all of you have heard of psychology, and but you may have some preconceived notions about what it is. So if someone asks you, what is a psychologist? What would be something that might come to your mind? Maybe it would be something that would look like this picture here. Maybe it would be the therapist who would give wise advice to someone lying on the couch who is having a lot of stress in their lives. Maybe the psychologist would ask the person to tell me about your mother or something like that. But really, when we're talking about psychology, psychotherapy, the work that a clinical or counseling psychologist might do, is really only one part of a very large field that touches in many areas of our lives. So if we look at the textbook definition of psychology, which is a pretty good one, we would call it the scientific study of behavior and mental processes. Now let's break down this definition, because that's very important to consider what all of this means. Scientific study of behavior and mental process means we're talking about a science. Psychology is a science. In fact, the second chapter of the textbook talks about the science of psychology. And we need to realize that psychology is a science. And what a science really means is it's a method of asking and answering questions. So they use systematic methods to find out about behavior and mental processes, for example. And realize that science is obviously used by fields like biology, chemistry, physics, and whatnot, and really all of those fields are using those systematic methods of asking and answering questions. So in that case, psychology is very much like those other fields. But it's a scientific study of behavior. What can be directly observed? Really, that is an important thing to recognize in terms of the things, who we are and the things that we do. There are some things that can be observed and some things that are really inside of us that may not be directly observed. For example, if I am walking, it is certainly observable to see me walk. You can even measure how fast I walk, for example. And that is something that can be directly observed. You can also directly observe my blood pressure, for example. Now, you might not be able to see my blood pressure, but we have devices that can measure our blood pressure. So that's an example of something that also can be observed as you know with increased advances in technology. There are many things that we can observe that in the past we could not. For example, the fMRI is something that can observe your brain activity while you are conscious. And in that respect, that is certainly something that could not have been observed 50 or 60 years ago, but can indeed be observed now. But even with our advances in technology, there are still some things that we cannot as of yet directly observe, and those are those mental processes. Your thoughts, your feelings, your motives. Now let's say, for example, we're talking about something like sadness. Okay? If you are feeling sad, I cannot directly observe you feeling sad. On the other hand, there are some things that I can observe. If you are frowning, if your chin is down, if you are crying, these are behaviors that I can observe, and these behaviors might indicate sadness. But sadness itself is a mental process. It is a feeling, it is an emotion. It is not something that I can directly observe. You know, your goals, for example, you know, your achievement goals. The only way I could observe that is I could observe what you tell me about them. You might tell me that you want to get an A in this course. You might tell me that you want to eventually get a doctorate in some field. But, you know, all I can, that's your behavior of you telling me this. I can't directly observe what your true motives are. And in that case, those are mental processes. And as we'll talk about in a little while, there are some psychologists who focus their attention more on the behaviors, while others also really pay attention to mental processes. And again, with advances in technology, maybe some mental processes can be directly observed. As I was saying before, the fMRI can observe brain activity, so we know something is going on, but we nevertheless can't directly observe what a person might be thinking. We can only ask the person what he or she is thinking, and the person can tell us. And in that case, it's telling us the behavior.